Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about China. China is changing while we watch. These changes are political, economic, and technological. Our guest for the show is Manny Menendez, chairman of MCM Group. Incidentally, he organized the first equity group between the US and China in 1980. That's some time ago. Welcome to the show, Manny.
My pleasure. Aloha.
Manny, you're an old China hand and businessman, and we'd like you to help us understand the dramatic changes that are underway in China, including political and geopolitical changes, economic and business changes, military and technology changes. So let's see if we can get a handle on what's going on. You get to China very often. You can give us an on the ground view of how China is doing.
Thank you for inviting me to the show, Jay. You're an old friend, and yes, I think China is doing well. Yeah, there's challenges in the global markets today, but overall, China's GDP growth should be about 5% GDP growth this year. They've weathered all sorts of challenges, especially from the West. If you want to just some data points, the current trade between the U.S. and China is about 145 billion imports from the U.S. To China, and from China to the U.S. is about 439 billion. And as I mentioned many times, this trade imbalance is not created by China. It's created by the companies who order products from China, like Apple and Walmart and Costco, et cetera, et cetera. But generally speaking, the market is stable, and I think they've shored the ship. And the tariffs have not helped. And we can talk about that when you want to. But the tariffs is an interesting dynamic currently, challenging not only U.S.-China relations, but U.S. relations with many parts of the world.
Well, let's talk about it now. I'm very concerned, and I know that China is or should be concerned about Trump's plans for the tariffs. It's hard to get a handle on what he is really doing and wants to do. But what's the status of the quote negotiations, end quote, as they stand?
Well, they had initial negotiations, as you know, in Geneva. And that was really important because the key for the number one economy in the world, the US, and number two economy in the world, China, the key is you have to have meetings face to face and talk through the issues. Actually, I think 90 to 95% of the issues between China and the US are very easy to solve because they're mostly policy related. But those 5% are that I call them the thorny issues. And those thorny issues need face to face meetings and really getting into a granular level how to fix them, and also doing it in a way where there's mutual respect and the agreement to agree to disagree, because you can't solve everything. But the tariffs, generally speaking, when you have a 145% tariff, you're basically saying we're stopping business with you. I mean, that does not work. But tariffs are not being used in the traditional way of saying that there's some unfair competition. I think it's being used in this context more as a negotiation tool between the U.S. and China. And they just had a round of meetings in London where the tariffs were reduced, I think, by 100%, but they're still so much too high. You have to remember, Jay, when you have tariffs, the people who pay the tariffs are actually the American consumer. So the American consumer will pay more. It increases inflation, and it actually leads us towards a recession. So at the end of the day, tariffs, when Apple gets $30 billion worth of iPhones from China, and you have a 145% tariff, they have to pass that cost along to consumers. So at the end of the day, the consumers will pay more. That's the actual reality.
I find it that it's extraordinary that Trump would advance the notion that China would pay the tariffs, or any country that we buy from would pay the tariffs. And it is quite extraordinary to find that some people, thanks to Trump, still believe that, even though every economist, every business person in the world Every diplomat in the world, every leader in the world, except Trump, knows very well that it's the companies that import, they pay the tariffs. And that means it's passed on to the consumer. I mean, it's just basic economics 101.
Anytime I meet any leaders, especially government people, I explain that China has never paid a tax.
Yeah.
It's a tax. It's an import tax. So that is usually the way it's broken up. Is sometimes the manufacturer can eat, if you will, some of the margin. They could take some of the tariff, but ultimately it's passed on to the. And sometimes the company importing the product into the states can take some of the tariff, but ultimately the majority is actually paid by the consumer.
We know that that leads to inflation.
For sure,
We
it
know
does.
that damages the economy of the importing country
No question.
because consumers have to pay this extra amount. But it seems to me that before Trump got in office, before he started with this tariff program, things seemed to be working fine. What was the situation before he started pushing China around with these tariffs?
Well, there were tariffs in his first term. The 25% tariffs, and then it was in Trump's first term, and then Biden kept them, and then actually President Biden, clamped down on some of those sensitive areas like advanced chips and so forth. But kept them. But once you go from 25% to 145%, that just doesn't make any sense because it doesn't make any business sense as you've already mentioned and I've mentioned. But it's a negotiating tool. I think the real challenge, Jay, is to figure out what in the end we want. What is it that we want, from these negotiations? And what business people like and what Wall Street likes is predictability and stability. And when you have one day you have tariffs and then 90-day pause, a 30-day pause, and then another tariff, it's on again, off again. What happens is the market reacts violently, as you saw when the tariffs first came out. Within 3 days, Apple, which was the number one company at the time in terms of market capitalization, lost $600 billion in value in one day. And then the market in 11 weeks, it's recovered somewhat, but in 11 weeks from January, when this tariffs war went into effect, the market lost $11 trillion, so $1 trillion over every week for 11 weeks. So markets, investors like predictability and stability. And the other thing that's happened that's been a consequence of this kind of on again tariffs, off again tariffs, is investors are not investing money. They have the money, they have projects, and they're kind of holding back. Well, we'll hold back because we're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. So there's been kind of you know, a, a freeze, you will, on a lot of projects that would be going forward. And projects equal jobs, and jobs equal taxes. So they all connect. And when you put a freeze on projects, it stalls the economy, and that's also one of the things you have to watch carefully. That will also increase the odds of a recession. Even our chairman of the Fed, Chairman Powell, said when you have these kind of unexpected, significant tariffs, you're increasing costs, increasing prices, increasing inflation, and have a good possibility that we're going to head towards a recession. That came from our chairman of the Fed.
You've been watching China, well, I guess from 1980 or thereabouts until now. And I get 45 years myself when I do the
Yes,
math.
yeah, it is.
And have you ever seen tariffs that are so uncertain the way they are now under Trump?
So if you go back to 1930 to the Smoot-Hawley Act, Tariff Act, that was when the U.S. Put tariffs on the whole world, and they were significant. And by the way, that act still is in existence and can be used again, if you will. I mean, there's a whole list of like Section 301 of the Trade Act. I'm just looking at my notes. Section 122. There's all these different Section 338 of the Tariff Act, which is the one of 1930. There's all these other levers that can be used as tariffs when it's appropriate. And in this case, I don't think it's appropriate. And the tariffs during the time of the Great Depression, Smoot-Hawley, actually prolonged the depression and really hurt the U.S. Quite a lot, with not only uh, extending the depression, but also alienating a lot of our allies at the same time, which I think, done a great job. If you look at what's happened with close allies in Europe and Mexico and Canada and so forth. But coming
Oh,
back to
yeah.
your other question, the key in China today is different than 1980. In 1980, the per capita income was around $100 per person per year. Now in China, it's around $15,000 per person per year, and that's over a 1.4 billion population. So in my lifetime, I've seen it go from about $100 a year to $15,000 a year, which is unbelievable. It's a miracle. And what that has caused is the creation of a middle class of between 500 and 600 million people. And what China has been pivoting on is going from just a manufacturing, the world's manufacturer, to actually a world market. And what drives the US economy, as you know, Jay, is consumption. So China is pushing big time consumption in their own market, and then also expanding to other markets because the U.S., as I said, it's around 439 billion in exports, but that's only 15% of the exports from China to other countries. So the other 85% is other countries that China is working with. And during this trade tariff tit for tat back and forth, China has expanded its relationships uh, really outstandingly to the Middle East. Lots of activity between Middle East and China and South America, and they're pushing a lot of other venues and other relationships so that they're not as reliant, if you will, on the U.S. market.
What I get is the tariffs have driven China to do this. They have all these goods they've manufactured. They have a juggernaut of manufacture and design. I mean, for example, the BYD car, it's an excellent car
Great
and
call.
great car. And so many things they have decided that in order to deal with, create countermeasures that deal with Trump, they're going to sell it somewhere else. And the market is lush because they have connections, they have investments, they have presence in every continent in the world.
But
So
you have
they can
to,
go to Africa and sell. They
yes.
can go to Latin America and sell. They have an existing relationship with every country in Southeast Asia, and they can sell there. And they got quality goods to sell. So it's actually was not a hard choice for China when they saw that Trump was, putting these barriers in their way. They just looked around and decided they'd just point their sales efforts elsewhere.
Well, they
It
had
was simple. It was simple, and it has worked well, right?
right. They've had relationships with many, many, many countries, both developing nations and more mature economies as well. And I think you have to remember the principle of the best product at the best price with the best quality with the best delivery is a winner. And it doesn't matter which country. If you have those four elements, you will win. And China has been able to do that in many categories. And basic manufacturing, as you know, left the U.S. So when we talk, we want to nearshore jobs back to the U.S. It really needs to be more granular and more targeted. We don't. It would be very difficult to nearshore massive garment manufacturing back to the U.S. because you won't find the workers to do it anyway. So you have to be targeted when you talk about nearshoring and bringing jobs back to the U.S. We should be talking about jobs of the future, not jobs of the past.
Well, you have to trade off. If you have to trade off having a recession, which is negative, and reshoring, which is, I think, Trump's term for it, manufacturing into the US, it's unlikely that he will be able to do that. The United States will be able to reshore manufacturing jobs. And so far, it seems like that's not happening. And what is happening in large part is that American manufacturers are moving away from the country.
Well,
Uh,
I think reshoring is possible, but my point, Jay, is you want to bring manufacturing of high paying future jobs and future manufacturing, whether it's AI related or high tech related or robotic related, uh, going into basic manufacturing. If you brought it back to the country, our US, it would be too expensive. And I think we'll have difficulty in finding a labor force that would want to go in those type of jobs.
Especially so when you have when you disqualify undocumented aliens, Latinos, even documented aliens, and you make it hard for them.
Well,
So uh,
total, I agree. But my point on the China market, the China market is now, because of the middle class, is really consuming. So exports to China, are growing, and there's a consuming middle class, which is really what's shoring up and keeping the economy stable at least 5% this coming year.
well, I agree that China is becoming a middle class country, and I've seen a number of videos, and I think the Chinese government, has something to do with this, demonstrating just how successful some of the Chinese cities are in terms of offering shopping and just fantastic middle class attractions.
And
Chongqing is one,
yeah, for sure.
Shenzhen is another one. And I don't know if you've seen the Louvre
Yes,
Shopping Center, it's in a design district
yes,
south
yes.
of Shanghai. I mean, it's beautiful. China is creating a kind of paradise for the middle class. But the problem, and I need you to tell me about this, the problem is that there's a lot of people who are overeducated, the PhDs with technology degrees who can't find a job. There's a lot of people who have
Yes.
what they think is a good job, but for some reason they're not getting paid. And so you have a lot of people who are disturbed about the China economy. It's not working for them. And theoretically, it offers middle class benefits, but in fact, there are troubles in the economy. It's so much so that there are at least rumors that Xi Jinping is going to have to withdraw, retire, and find a succession plan. What about all of that?
Let's go to the young people. China graduates, 10, 11 million Chinese take the Gaokao, the national exam for getting into schools. And many Chinese that graduate, they're having a challenge to find employment. I mean, that happens in our country as well. But in China, it's always a scale. It's always a big number, just because of the sheer population. We graduate, round numbers, 40,000 engineers a year, and China graduates 450,000 engineers a year. So to absorb that into a smaller economy that's not growing, 5% is the envy of a lot of large economies in the world. If you could grow at 5%, we usually grow in the U.S. about 1.5 to 2.5%, somewhere in that range. But I mean, our GDP in the U.S. is about, right now, round numbers, Jay, about 27, 28 trillion GDP. China is about, round numbers, 19 trillion, 20 trillion, in that neighborhood. So it is a challenge, definitely, that the Chinese are trying to figure out a way to absorb all those graduates that come out of school and get a good paying job. It is a challenge for sure. No one's been able to figure it completely, but I think it really reared its head significantly when you had COVID. So COVID kind of really put the brakes on the China's economy big time, and then you had still students graduating, and then you had the backlog of the students graduating, not being able to job, and COVID, and that's really carried over into the recent years. I don't know what the solution is when it comes to President Xi's future retirement. I can't comment on that because I really don't know. I don't think anyone really knows.
There have been a number of articles about it. I guess the question is, assuming that happens, assuming that he finds he needs to, retire and create a succession plan. Is that related to the mandate of heaven? Is that related to the problems with the economy? Are people laying those problems at his doorstep?
So I think everyone lays problems that are happening in a country at the doorstep of the government for sure. But I don't think that would be the driving, Jay, by far. That won't be a driving force of whether he retires or doesn't retire. That will not be it. I think President Xi is trying to do what he said he would try to do, and that is get rid of absolute poverty, which he did in 2020. The term absolute poverty, as defined by the United Nations, they did that. We're able to do it. That doesn't mean that means that everybody's wealthy in China. No, there's a lot of people that are that need much, much more, especially in the rural areas, and they're working on it. But I don't think that will be the driving force. And the second thing he's kind of known for in his administration is try to remove corruption, from the system, and that's been a challenge. But they're still working on it. But he'll decide when he's ready. I think he'll decide when he should leave, when he thinks it's a good time. But that's out of my pay grade to
Oh,
know.
sure, but my point is that just a few years ago, it sure looked like he was setting up a situation where he would rule for life, and now that seems old news.
No,
That
I don't. Again, just being there as long as I have, uh, it's one of the positive things is he's a strong leader. I mean, in some categories you might think in the West too strong, but he's a strong leader that most Chinese that I know appreciate his leadership. I mean, they think in some areas he's strong, but you have to be strong in that position in that country.
oh,
And again,
sure.
and I'm not the political expert. I'm a business guy and mostly focus on the business world.
Can you help me understand why the Trump government, the GOP, the MAGAs, and all that are so hostile to China? To me, it doesn't make sense at all. My experience with China has been essentially positive. I've been there 3 times. I've enjoyed it. I've appreciated it. I've seen great possibilities for trade and alliances in and with China. And yet, this government seems to be doing everything they can to express hostility.
Well,
Why is that?
I can tell you from the Chinese perspective, there's
No,
certain.
no. Tell me from the American perspective first.
Well, okay. Well, I think they kind of go hand in hand. So there are certain areas you mentioned yourself BYD. BYD and a lot of the EV companies in China are well advanced, but they've been working on it for 25 years. It's not something that just happened overnight. So when you look at a BYD car, it is doing well in many, many, many markets, and it's well made and well priced. And there are certain categories, and I'll just use BYD. When you look at BYD, if you took the BYD plant, let's just say it's a million square feet, whatever it is, and you set it up in the US, same amount of workers, same input of electricity, same working hours, and everything, that same vehicle made in the US would be about 50 to 60% higher just because the costs in the US are higher. It's not that the Chinese are cheating, it's just that the costs in China, and this is kind of one of the things that are always missed in the discussions, the costs in China, especially in the manufacturing area, are less. Period. And again, our per capita income in the United States, I think the average now, last time I looked, was 79,000, 80,000 US dollars. In China, it's the exact number is 13,500. So the costs are different, and they work 24/7 in China. They will work and work and work, and they produce a quality product. And the thing, I think even Apple, the chairman of Apple, I listened to him the other day. He said, if you're in China, it is definitely not the cheapest place in the world. There are a lot of places in the world now in terms of manufacturing that is less expensive. But they have the whole, over that 45 years I've been there, they have the whole equation now. They have shipping, the supply chain, everything is arranged now that you have really a seamless structure that they can get things in and out efficiently, manufacture efficiently, and get it out. So it's not by far it's not the most inexpensive place because labor costs have gone up. Uh, 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 Workers have benefits now, just like we have benefits in the U.S. Healthcare and so forth. So the costs have definitely risen in China. So it's not the cheapest place, but they have the whole system in place.
There's something else in my observation. Um, they're they're inspired. I remember when I had one of those trips. Somebody was with us, wanted to have a circuit board designed in Tianjin,
Yes,
and in the industrial park there.
yes.
And a fellow asked, the manager of this company, how long will it take to design and deliver the circuit board? And the guy said, maybe 5 days. It's extraordinary. You don't
Yes,
find that in the US ever.
yeah.
You run into all kinds of snags and delays and obstacles and what have you. And I would imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, I would imagine, aside from the cost of labor and maybe it's not so cheap anymore. The fact is they still have that attitude.
There's the sense of urgency. I mean, the three most important things in China business when you talk to Chinese are entrepreneurial. The three most important things is making money, and making money. I mean,
Mm.
they are interested in doing a good job, being efficient, and delivering, and they do it quickly. You're absolutely right. I mean, if you really wanted to build the high speed rail in Honolulu, have the Chinese partner with them, and let's just say there were good U.S. China relations, and you'd have a great high speed rail in a year in Honolulu.
Well, I did see a video about that. I think it was from Shanghai to Hong Kong. And that's I'm trying to remember the number. It's 700 kilometers,
Yes.
700 kilometers, and the speed of the thing is over 200 per hour.
Yep. Yeah.
And
They average around 380 to 390 kilometers an hour. Yes.
wow, you can get there in no time.
When I
And
when I go from when I go from Beijing to Shanghai, I never take the airplane. It's never on time, but the train always on time. Takes 4 hours from Beijing to Shanghai. It's comfortable. It's clean. It's reasonably priced, and it's about they can go faster, but their average is around 300 to 390 kilometers an hour.
that's remarkable all by itself. I mean, it probably exceeds the efficiency of the Japan bullet train.
Oh, I think Japan is great. The Kinsan-sen,
Yeah. Hmm.
it's great. The TVR in France and the German system is great. But again, the key is the Chinese have been able to really push mobility. So all the cities are now connected. You want to go from Shenzhen. I used to drive from Shenzhen to Beijing. It took 2.5 hours. It now takes 28 minutes. I mean, it's just amazing. And they're not just connecting. Part of the strategy going forward, and in terms of mobility, is they're connecting actually other countries to China through the high speed train. But it's so comfortable, so reliable, and so forth.
We need to examine the status of the Belt Road because that's global.
Well, BRI, it's called the Belt and Road Initiative. It in some countries doing very, very well. I mean, overall, it's doing well. I mean, other countries that are not used to working with I mean, the Chinese are quite, when it comes to business, are quite aggressive. They want to get things done and move quickly. And so, in some countries, they're not used to. It takes a while to get used to that kind of. Uh, that kind of dynamic personality. But no, I think the BRI is overall whatever the data is. I spoke on Bloomberg actually about BRI not too long ago, but it's a good thing when people trade with each other and work together. And I have a saying for my company. My company's motto, Jay, is world peace through world trade. Because when people work together, cooperate with each other, we end up not having terrible conflicts with each other. Just keeping working together, especially through trade, whether it's cultural exchanges, education exchanges, sports exchanges, but definitely trade, binds us together, and not kind of where we've been tracking, where we become
Well,
more isolated.
Trump has said in the Middle East that he feels the solution in the Middle East is through, quote, prosperity, end quote. So, you're saying what he's saying, and I would say the same.
Yeah.
It's a question of just how you do that. The devil is in the detail. Because if you go hostile on people, you're undermining, that sense of camaraderie, that sense of alliance, that sense of mutual benefit through mutual trade. But I think the world all knows as a concept that trade is good for peace. That
Yeah.
trade is good for all the trading partners.
Yeah, lifting up lives through better living conditions, better economy. All people in the world, as you know, Jay, ultimately want the same thing in simple terms: roof over the head, food on the table, and a little extra money to do the fun things they want to do. And
Yeah.
that context is different in different parts of the world, but ultimately, when we all do better, even Warren Buffett came out and said, we should all do what we all do best, and having trade conflicts is not the way forward. I mean,
No,
he is one of the many that basically say the same thing.
we were going to look at the issue of um, Xi Jinping and China's view of the U.S. because there's you'll have to agree with me. There's hostility on both sides. It's hard to say where it started, but you'll have to agree that we have a certain hostile relationship right now. What motivates that? What's the reason for that on the China side?
Well, I don't think if you look at just go back to the trade wars. China did not institute any tariffs in the U.S. It started with the U.S. with Trump. He said, "I'm going to put a 25% tariff," and then China had to respond with tit for tat. And this kind of tit for tat for doing government relations, it just doesn't work. And then when the second Trump term, or even Biden, when he started putting certain kind of restrictions, that China tit for tat did the same kind of restrictions. And then Trump two went the second term, put more tariffs, and then China has to respond. But China hasn't instigated these; they've only responded to them. And
Hmm.
I think, Jay, we have to go back to, I'll give you an example with Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Tip was Speaker of the House, and I knew him. It was a great guy. And you had President Reagan, and they would fight, head to head in the media and the news. And then on the weekend, Tip would go over to the White House and have a whiskey together with President Reagan. So there was this respect for each other. So we have to get back to whatever country we deal with. There has to be mutual respect and the agreement to disagree. We're not going to agree on everything. Our system is great. I love our country. I love our system. But there's challenges in it. It's being tested right now. China has its system, and there's challenges in its system. But when it comes to looking at the number one and the number two economy of the world, those two economies represent about 45% of the world's GDP. Two countries, so they have to get it right for not only our country, China, and the U.S., but we have to get it right for the world, because when U.S. and China are fighting, it impacts actually the economies of the world. So we,
Well, the U.S. Everybody says the U.S. is the number one economy, and its principal rival is China, and China is the number two economy. And yet, a lot of the things that China does seem to be we're not satisfied with being number two. We want to be in short order. We want to be number one. Is that really necessary? Is that important for Xi Jinping and China?
I you say again, my humble view. I think China is interested in being number one in any kind of business it can do. It will compete fiercely for business with the rest of the world. I don't think China wakes up in the morning and says, we want to be number one at everything. I don't think that's in their brain waves. I think that when it comes to business and growing the economy and improving the economy and improving people's lives and lifting them up to another level, I think that's in their mind. So uh, we have to learn, I think, to share the stage, and it's complicated because remember, Jay, China has only been in this position since 1980 is when they opened up the new China, where it became a market economy, and they called it the open door policy. So it's not been doing this a long time. So as it goes on the world stage, it's also has to. It's a little awkward because it's not a long learning curve that they have. But I can tell you the main focus of the leaders I've met over the years is how do we make our country better? How does China make it better for the people? And that's kind of where the drive is. And in our country, when we have great leaders, that's their motivation in our country too. How do we make our country fulfill the dreams of our country? How do we put the old saying, put two chickens in every pot? How do we grow the U.S. so that everyone can benefit in the U.S.?
We're not into that anymore, though, Manny. We're into how about no chickens for a lot of people. Let me go back to why threaten Taiwan? Why take over Hong Kong early? Why do balloons over the U.S.? Why have police stations in Manhattan? Why so much hacking on
Well,
U.S. institutions
I
and
can't.
spying on college campuses, especially in technology? Now, you can say, well, maybe it's overstated by the U.S., but all of these things, to some significant degree, exist. Why try to build a navy and a military as big as this one? Why be so aggressive with peripheral countries, including India? In the Himalayas. I mean, is this necessary for China? It doesn't seem necessary for the China you and I have been talking about.
I can't comment on all of the items, but I think that you must look at it maybe a little bit differently. I think that we in the States, just like other countries and China included, sometimes we have what we call unforced errors. And sometimes some of these things are not decided at the top. We assume that everything that happens in a country is decided by the number one leader. That sometimes is not the case. Sometimes there's these unforced errors that happen, and then the leader finds about it later, and then they figure out how to explain it to the world. Right? We do that in the States. They do it in China, and so forth. But I don't think in China it needs to be, in some cases, as aggressive in certain areas as you're mentioning. And just like we don't need to be so aggressive. I like the old saying, speak softly and carry a big stick.
Mm, yeah.
I think soft power. A good buddy of mine who passed away recently, Dr. Joe Nye, who used to be the dean at the Harvard Kennedy School, good New Jersey boy. He came up with the concept of soft power, and I think we have
And
to go.
smart power. Don't forget smart power.
Yeah, no, I think soft power with small power, they go hand in hand. They have to be together, and I think we need to get back to this way of talking to each other, understanding the circumstances. Like in Mark Twain, there's a famous, Huckleberry Finn. It talks about walking in the other guy's moccasins. So I think we have to walk in the other person's shoes to understand the context of their environment, because their environment is different than our environment. And sometimes the decisions that are made, we may not understand on the ground in the US because we're not in the moccasins of the Chinese, and the Chinese may not understand our decisions because they're not in the moccasins of the U.S. We have to get back, no matter what disagreements we have to get back to the table, face to face, agree to disagree with mutual respect.
Part of what I'm asking is about China's treatment of its own people. I mean, think of the Uyghurs in the Southwest. Think of the people, and you must know some of them because I know some of them, who are really terrified about what they might say, what they might do. And I know one guy who's terrified about what the U.S. will think of him and what China will think of him. He's got fear on both sides of the equation. But what I'm saying is there are a lot of people in China who are afraid. Think of what China did to the newspaper editors in Hong Kong. It's happens in a totalitarian government. I know that, and you can say that she wants to stop corruption, but at the fringe of stopping corruption, you wind up terrorizing everyone. And I think there are a lot of people in China who are terrorized. And then you add the fact that a lot of people who I know used to go to China, wanted to go as tourists, as eyes wide open, let's learn about this, let's be involved, let's get a job even. They don't want to go anymore. They're afraid. Is that necessary?
I don't share that view. I don't think China is a safe place. It's not a place to be afraid at all. When you say a lot of people, a lot, that's a subjective number. I mean, are there issues and are there concerns? Yes, but if you want to go to a safe place, China's in all the place. And I've traveled to maybe of the 200 countries of the world, maybe I've been in 80 to 100 of them. Uh, China is safe. And for the most part, at least the people I know, because again, Jay, my focus is not on politics or anything like that, but my focus is on business. And you must understand, private industry now in China represents 60% of the GDP. In the beginning, it was zero. So private industry also represents 80% of new jobs in urban cities. And so recently, one of the big shifts that we should really look at and talk about that's positive is the shift where China has now looked at private industry in a different lens at the top. And President Xi had the meeting with, the founder of Alibaba and Tencent and all the kind of big, Mr. Ren from Huawei and all the big companies, and basically say, we need you. We need entrepreneurship. We need the growth in the private sector, and that has not happened up until recently. Because in the past they've been mostly persona non grata and not supported. But now there's a big shift in the government because private industry matters just like it does in US. I mean, our backbone of our economy is small and medium sized enterprises in our country. That is the people who create new jobs. That is the creation of expansion possibility. It's not the huge multinationals that create the backbone of American industry. So China recognizes that, and it's kind of a big shift of recent is really this reaching out to the private sector, which I think is super positive.
Well, I remember when the whole thing was WOFI, wholly owned foreign enterprise. Remember
Yes.
that? I don't know if it still exists, but
No, no,
the problem.
it does. It's just one. It's a WOFI, or a wholly foreign owned enterprise. It's just one type of legal entity. A WOFI is equal to an LLC in the United States.
If you wanted to do that, you would have to have Chinese members of your board of directors. You'd have to have a lot of influence
That
by the Chinese government on your organization,
that is not
and you were exposed, or you felt you were
not
exposed
Jay.
to the notion that China would take your technology.
No.
Does that exist today? Or today, do we have a situation where I'm a small business guy or a medium or a large business guy, and I want to go to China and I can establish my company in China without, having issues with the government? Of course, you have to have regulation and all that, but without having the kind of issues where they try to control my company, my technology. Am I free to do that today, 2025?
Well, you were free to do it yesterday. So where I think what you said is not accurate is a WOFI. You own it yourself. So you have your own board. It could be a single member, and the only requirement in the past was you have to have one employee that's local. So one employee of the company. That's it. That's the only thing in it. And WOFI, there's two parts of it. You have to have registered capital, and then you have to have your capital contribution. So registered capital used to be that within a 10-year period, if you said your registered capital is $1 million, you had to put in $1 million. But now it's much more flexible. I can set up a WOFI. Took a long time in the past, maybe took 4 months. Now it can do it in 30 days. But no, one of the flaws in what you've said that's not true is about IP. You were alluding to IP. And if you have a company in China like a WOFI, you have to give your IP. All the deals I've done over many, many years, if the deal is not right, you can say no. So if you had an IP and it was not the right partner or the right deal, you just say, this one doesn't work for me. Let's look at it I've never, actually, I never say no. I always say, let's look at it another time, and you walk away and don't burn any bridges, So, I mean, it's a great technique, but, but the point is, you don't have to, you're not forced to give your IP. I hear that often, and I just say, well, if it's not the right deal, you just don't do it. But a WOFI is owned by you. I have a WOFI in China. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's not. There's no outside ownership in the WOFI. I mean, it's just me as a foreigner, because it's a wholly foreign owned. The foreign owned, the FO, foreign owned, means me, enterprise, and that entity then can do a business in China in local currency. One of the reasons you set up a WOFI, by the way, Jay, is because you can do business in local currency and foreign currency. And most people miss that little tiny point, but it's important if you're going to do business. Anytime a Chinese wants to, say, get something, say, import it, and you need or do a contract with a foreigner and they need US dollars, they have to get approval to convert their money from renminbi, which is the local currency, to US dollars. It goes through an organization, state organization called SAFE, the State Administration for Foreign Exchange. So every time you want to convert foreign currency or do a foreign currency transaction, you have to get SAFE approval through the banks.
I would like to have another show with you about this if you're available.
Would love to tell you the difference between the WOFI versus a JV versus different
Yeah,
forms of legal structure, because the legal structure should be in place in order to make sure you're doing business in an optimum way within that country and opens yourself to the larger market opportunities.
I would like to talk about the state of technology, the state of IP protection, if you will. I would like to talk about the reserve currency issue. I'd like to talk about BRICS, China's
Yes.
role in that. I'd like to talk about China's relationship with Russia, China's relationship with Iran these days, which is very current. All these things, which we don't have time today, but I want to ask you, I want to set up a hypothetical with you and ask you for your thoughts about this, okay? You are an amazing phenomenon, Manny. You have been there for a lifetime. You have done incredible things from clean coal on forward. You have started businesses. You have expanded your influence around China. I don't know if you speak Mandarin, but I would guess you do. You certainly.
Mama hoo hoo. A little bit, yeah.
And I completely endorse and adopt the notion of peace through prosperity, peace through trade. You are a living example of that. So here we are, and we have the certain hostility that the Republican Party and Trump and MAGA and all that have created and perpetuate every day vis-a-vis China. There's obviously a better way for the United States to handle its relationships with China. And thus, there's a better way for individuals, citizens, and business people and corporate executives to handle their relationships with China. In a perfect world, we'd all be Manny Menendez. We'd be out there, we'd be making business, making deals, making trade, making prosperity for both sides of the equation. So here's a fellow who's just graduated college or law school, or universities, even universities that have had trouble lately. The future of the United States, those kids. Okay? And here's business people who are open-minded and who are not stuck on, political partisanship vis-a-vis our foreign relations, especially our relations with China. What is your advice to them? How do we achieve a whole legion of Manny Menendez's?
Thank you for the compliment. But I mean, I think that, yeah, young people coming out of school, one of the things I would love, if I was the wealthiest guy in the world, I would fly every government leader to China just so that they would have a chance to interact with the Chinese and see the country, not only the big cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, so forth, but also see the other areas, the rural areas of China, because then you'll know that China is both a wealthy country and a growing country at the same time, and with a lot of needs. So, and that young people could be part of that equation. I mean, cultures, bridging and doing trade between countries is, you have to like international business. I mean, I love it. International relations, international business is very, very important. Love international cultures, and learning about cultures is very important. So I think young people, if they have the time and the effort, they should travel. If China is not their cup of tea, but just travel to other countries, because going to other countries gives you context of what's going on in the world from people on the ground. And you'll see that people on the ground, at least again, Jay, in my humble view, people on the ground in every country that I've ever been to all want the same thing. They're usually very welcoming people. I don't care which country, China in particular for sure, Japan, the same. These countries welcome you. And there's an old Chinese saying from Confucius, and I'll use that saying: when people come from afar, you should welcome them and be happy. So China has always been of a culture that welcomes foreigners, from Marco Polo on, and are happy that people are visiting them. So I would say to young people, travel. If China is not your cup of tea, travel the countries, get to know people, because that will give you context, especially in the world we live in today, of what's going on in those countries, and that leaders change, but the key is people to people relationships. People to people are what will drive our civilizations forward in the future. That's what I would tell the young people.
Oh, wow. You make me want to go back there, Manny.
Should. I mean, half of the time I'm out of country. I'm in China and spending, really time there. But the point is travel. Traveling is significant. Travel is important. And I think learning and meeting other cultures, other people, I think will be beneficial to society, and also beneficial to the decision making process when you're deciding on policies and have never been in a country. I think that's not a good thing. I think, as I said, if I was the wealthiest guy in the world, I would fly every member of the Senate and Congress and in the executive wing, and have them spend some time in China and other countries that they're making decisions on, so that they can meet the people on the ground. Key, Jay, is the people on the ground. Leaders change from time to time, but the people are the key. People to people relationships, and you'll see most of the world, we actually all get along. Sometimes we have some leaders that get off the reservation, but the key is the people to people. That's the stability that we have to look at going forward.
Well put. Thank you very much, Manny Menendez. Thanks to our guest, Manny Menendez, chairman of MCM Group. We'll have to leave it there. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Global Connections. We've been discussing China. China is changing while we watch. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha. Aloha, Manny, and Saijian.
Saijen, thanks, Jay.